Scary True Horror Stories Set in Hotels. Part 1. Hey everyone, tonight we're drifting back to some of the strangest, most unsettling moments that have unfolded in hotels across America. Places where people go to rest, to escape, to start fresh, and sometimes to never leave at all. So go ahead and settle in, dim the lights, get comfortable. Because we're about to wander through some stories that are very real, very documented, and very, very strange. Let's begin. Story 1. The Cecil Hotel. Elisa Lam. We should probably start with the most infamous one, the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Built in 1924, back when Los Angeles still had that old glamour about it, or at least it tried to. The Cecil was meant to be a respectable place for business travelers. Marble lobby, grand architecture, all the trappings of early 20th century optimism. But of course, it didn't stay that way. By the 1950s, the neighborhood had changed. Skid Row crept closer. The hotel became cheaper, seedier, a place where people stayed when they had nowhere else to go. And naturally, given its location and clientele, some very dark things started happening within its walls. The Cecil became known for suicides, lots of them. People jumping from windows, hanging themselves in rooms. It was the kind of place where despair seemed to seep into the wallpaper. In the 1960s, a woman was found dead in her room, murdered and raped. Then another. Serial killers stayed there. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, rented a room on the top floor in 1985. Jack Unterweger, an Austrian journalist who was also secretly a serial killer, stayed there in 1991 while murdering sex workers in Los Angeles. The hotel tried to rebrand in 2011. They called part of it Stay on Main, hoping a new name would somehow erase decades of tragedy. It didn't really work. And then, in February 2013, something happened that would make the Cecil Hotel infamous all over again. A 21-year-old Canadian student named Elisa Lam checked into the hotel. She was traveling alone, blogging about her trip. Seems like she was having a good time exploring California. But on January 31st, she was supposed to check out. She didn't. Her family reported her missing. The hotel staff searched her room, nothing. No signs of struggle, no indication of where she'd gone. The Los Angeles Police Department got involved. They searched the hotel, reviewed security footage, interviewed guests. And that's when they found the elevator video. You've probably seen it. It's been watched millions of times online, analyzed frame by amateur detectives and conspiracy theorists. The footage shows Elisa entering an elevator, pressing multiple buttons. The doors don't close. She steps out, looks down the hallway, steps back in, presses more buttons, steps out again. She's moving strangely, erratically. At one point she appears to be hiding in the corner of the elevator. Then she steps out into the hallway, makes odd hand gestures as if she's talking to someone who isn't there, or hiding from someone who isn't there, and then she's gone. The elevator doors finally close, empty. The video went viral. People speculated endlessly. Was she being followed? Was she having a mental health crisis? Was something paranormal happening? The footage was eerie, unsettling, and deeply sad. 3 weeks later, guests at the hotel started complaining about the water. It was coming out brown with a strange taste, low pressure. The maintenance staff went up to the roof to check the water tanks. And there she was. Elisa Lam's body was found floating in one of the large water tanks on the roof. She was naked, her clothes and belongings floating nearby. The tank's opening was small, the ladder difficult to access. How she got up there, how she got into the tank, why she was there, none of it made immediate sense. The autopsy revealed no signs of physical trauma, no drugs in her system beyond her prescribed bipolar medication. The coroner ruled it an accidental drowning, likely complicated by her bipolar disorder. The prevailing theory became that she was experiencing a manic or psychotic episode, climbed to the roof, somehow got into the tank, and drowned. But of course that didn't satisfy everyone. How did she access the roof, which was supposedly locked? How did she lift the heavy lid of the water tank? Why were the hotel's rooftop alarms not triggered? Why did the elevator behave so strangely in the video? The Cecil Hotel closed in 2017 for renovations. It's still closed. Elisa Lam's death remains officially an accident. Her family has asked for privacy, for people to stop speculating, to let her rest. But the questions linger, and the footage still circulates. A young woman alone in an elevator, moving like she's seeing something no one else can see, and then gone, lost in a building that had already swallowed so many others. Let's drift over to the next story. Story 2. The Skirvin Hotel, The Woman in White. Oklahoma City, 1911. A man named William Skirvin decided to build the finest hotel in the state, the Skirvin Hotel. 10 stories, lavish furnishings, the first hotel in Oklahoma City with running water in every room. It was a big deal. Skirvin was proud. This was going to be his legacy. And for a while it was. Governors stayed there, movie stars, politicians. The Skirvin became the place to be seen in Oklahoma City. Elegant, prestigious, exactly what William Skirvin had envisioned. But like so many old hotels, the Skirvin had its secrets. There's a story, unverified, passed down through whispers and staff gossip, about a maid named Effie. She worked at the hotel in the 1930s, young, probably in her early 20s, and according to the legend, she had an affair with William Skirvin himself. Now William was married, prominent, wealthy, so when Effie became pregnant, this was a problem, a scandal waiting to happen. And naturally, Skirvin handled it the way powerful men often did back then. He made her disappear. The story goes that he locked Effie on the top floor of the hotel, kept her hidden there throughout her pregnancy. She gave birth to a baby girl alone in a room at the top of the building. And then, driven mad by isolation and despair, she threw herself and her infant daughter out the window. Again, this is legend. There's no verified historical record of an Effie, no documented suicide. But the story persists. And strange things have been happening at the Skirvin Hotel for decades. Guests report hearing a baby crying in the night. Soft, distant, coming from nowhere in particular. Women report feeling uncomfortable on certain floors, a sense of being watched, followed. Some have heard knocking on their doors in the middle of the night. They open the door and no one's there, just an empty hallway. NBA players have reported experiences too, because of course they have. The Skirvin is where visiting teams often stay when they play in Oklahoma City. And over the years, multiple players have refused to stay there, requesting different accommodations. In 2010, the New York Knicks stayed at the Skirvin. They lost badly. Several players complained about strange noises, doors opening on their own, an overall eerie feeling that kept them awake all night. Jared Jeffries, one of the players, told reporters he heard a woman's voice calling his name. When he looked around, no one was there. In 2014, the Miami Heat stayed there. Eric Spoelstra, the coach, said some of his players were a little freaked out. They also lost their game. In 2015, Taj Gibson of the Chicago Bulls said he'd never stay there again after his shower turned on by itself in the middle of the night. The hotel staff will tell you it's all nonsense, just old building noises, pipes settling, overactive imaginations. But they also don't seem surprised when guests ask to change rooms, or when someone mentions hearing a baby crying. The Skirvin Hotel is still operating today. It's been renovated, modernized, turned into a boutique hotel. But the top floor, the floor where Effie supposedly lived and died, still makes people uneasy. Housekeepers have reported cleaning rooms up there and feeling a sudden overwhelming sadness, a cold spot near the window, the sense that someone is standing right behind them, watching, and every so often someone hears it. A baby crying, soft and distant, gone as soon as you try to locate it. Maybe it's just the wind, maybe it's the building settling, or maybe somewhere in the Skirvin Hotel a young woman is still trapped, still grieving, still unable to leave. Let's move on. Story 3. The Hotel del Coronado. Kate Morgan. San Diego, California, 1888. The Hotel del Coronado opened on Coronado Island, just across the bay from downtown San Diego. It was spectacular. Victorian beach resort architecture, white walls, red roofs, sprawling across the coastline. It quickly became one of the most famous hotels on the West Coast. Presidents stayed there, celebrities, the wealthy and glamorous. And in November 1892, a woman checked in under the name Lottie A. Bernard. Her real name was Kate Morgan, She was 24 years old, traveling alone, which was unusual for a woman at the time. She told the hotel staff she was waiting for her brother to arrive. He was coming to meet her, she said, any day now. She checked into room 302, later changed to room 3312 after the hotel was renovated. She seemed unwell, pale, tired, complained of stomach pain. The staff noticed she kept to herself, didn't socialize much. She'd walk along the beach, sit alone in the hotel's common areas, waiting. Her brother never came. On Thanksgiving Day, November 29, 1892, Kate was found dead on the exterior stairs leading down to the beach. She'd been shot in the head. A gun was found near her body. The coroner ruled it a suicide. But the details were strange. The gun was found in her right hand, but Kate was left-handed. The bullet wound was to her right temple, an awkward angle for a left-handed person to shoot themselves. She had purchased the gun a few days earlier from a shop in San Diego, telling the clerk she needed it for protection. Protection from what, she didn't say. Some believed she was heartbroken. She'd been traveling with a man, possibly a husband, possibly a lover, who had abandoned her at the hotel. She was pregnant, some speculated, and couldn't bear the shame. Others thought she was ill, perhaps terminally, and chose to end her life on her own terms. Or maybe it wasn't suicide at all. Maybe someone else pulled the trigger. We'll never know. What we do know is that Kate Morgan's death became one of the Hotel del Coronado's most enduring mysteries, and almost immediately, strange things started happening. Guests in room 3312 reported odd occurrences, lights flickering, the television turning on and off by itself, items moving around the room. Some guests reported a cold presence, a feeling of being watched. Others said they saw a figure, a woman in dark Victorian clothing standing by the window looking out at the ocean. Housekeepers have reported finding the room inexplicably messy after they'd just cleaned it, curtains opening on their own, the scent of perfume, floral and old-fashioned, lingering in the air. One hotel security guard reported seeing a woman in period clothing walking along the beachfront in the early morning hours. He called out to her. She didn't respond. He walked closer, and she vanished. The hotel doesn't advertise the haunting, but they don't deny it either. Room 3312 is still available for booking. Some guests specifically request it, hoping for an encounter. Most report nothing, but some check out early. There's a photograph taken in the hotel's ballroom years after Kate's death. It shows a group of people at an event, and in the background, partially transparent, is the figure of a woman. She's wearing Victorian-era clothing. No one remembers her being there. No one knows who she is. Kate Morgan was buried in San Diego's Mount Hope Cemetery. Her grave is simple, understated, but at the Hotel del Coronado, she's never really left. Guests still report seeing her, still hear footsteps in empty hallways, still feel that cold, sorrowful presence in room 3312. Maybe she's waiting for someone. Maybe she's still looking for the brother who never came. Or maybe she's just stuck, unable to move on from the place where her life ended so abruptly, so sadly, on a Thanksgiving Day more than a century ago. Let's drift to the final story. Danton. Story 4. The Crescent Hotel. The Ghost Nurse. Eureka Springs, Arkansas. 1886. High on a hill overlooking the Ozark Mountains, the Crescent Hotel opened as a luxury resort for the wealthy. It was beautiful, grand. Limestone walls, sweeping verandas, mountain views. Guests came to take in the fresh air, the natural springs, the peaceful atmosphere. But by the 1930s, the hotel had fallen on hard times. The Great Depression hit, tourism dried up, and the Crescent Hotel closed its doors. And that's when Norman Baker arrived. Norman Baker was, he was a lot of things. A radio personality, an inventor, a con artist. And in 1937 he purchased the Crescent Hotel and transformed it into the Baker Hospital and Health Resort. Baker claimed he could cure cancer. He had no medical training, no medical degree, but that didn't stop him. He advertised his miracle treatments far and wide. Desperate, dying patients came from all over the country, hoping for a cure. There was no cure. Baker's treatments were nonsense. Watermelon seed injections, carbolic acid mixtures. Colored water, he claimed, was medicine. Patients paid exorbitant fees, suffered through his quack procedures, and died. Many of them died. In 1940, the federal government finally shut him down. Baker was arrested for mail fraud and sent to Leavenworth Prison. The hospital closed. The hotel sat empty for years, its halls still echoing with the suffering of all those doomed patients. When the Crescent Hotel eventually reopened as a hotel again, the hauntings began. Or maybe they'd been happening all along, and now there were people around to notice. The most famous ghost is a woman known as the ghost nurse. Guests and staff have reported seeing her on the 3rd and 4th floors, walking the hallways, carrying a clipboard or a tray of medicine. She's dressed in a white nurse's uniform from the 1930s. She seems focused, purposeful, as if she's still making her rounds, still checking on patients who are no longer there. Some guests have reported waking in the middle of the night to find her standing at the foot of their bed watching them. She doesn't speak, doesn't move, just stands there, and then fades away. Room 419 is particularly active. It was reportedly used as a morgue during Baker's time. Guests in that room have reported the bed shaking, the sensation of being touched, voices whispering in the dark. Some have checked out in the middle of the night, refusing to stay another minute. There's also a ghost named Theodora, a cancer patient who died at the hospital. She's been seen in room 419 as well, a frail, sad figure standing by the window. Guests report a heavy feeling of despair in that room, an overwhelming sadness that settles over them. The basement is even worse. During renovations, workers discovered a hidden morgue down there, along with jars of organs and tissue samples that Baker had kept. Because of course he did. The basement is now part of the hotel's ghost tour, and guides report feeling watched, touched, shoved. Some refuse to go down there alone. The Crescent Hotel leans into its haunted reputation now. They offer ghost tours. They advertise themselves as America's most haunted hotel. People come specifically hoping to see something, to feel something, and many do. A guest in 2015 took a photograph in her room. When she looked at it later, there was a face in the mirror behind her. An old woman, gaunt, staring directly at the camera. The guest said she was alone in the room when the photo was taken. Another guest reported waking to the sound of medical equipment beeping. There was no equipment in the room. The sound grew louder, more insistent, and then abruptly stopped. She checked out the next morning. Norman Baker's victims never got justice. They died painful, drawn-out deaths, clinging to false hope, drained of their money and their dignity. And maybe some of them are still there, still trapped in the place where they suffered. The ghost nurse still makes her rounds. The patients still linger. And the Crescent Hotel stands on its hill, beautiful and haunted, a monument to desperation, greed, and the terrible things people will do when they're promised a miracle. So there we are. 4 hotels, 4 tragedies, 4 places where something went terribly wrong, and the past just refuses to let go. The Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles, where Elisa Lam's last moments were caught on camera, forever looping in that eerie elevator footage. The Skirvin in Oklahoma City, where a maid named Effie may or may not have existed, but her ghost definitely does. The Hotel del Coronado, where Kate Morgan still waits for someone who will never come. And the Crescent Hotel, where Norman Baker's victims continue their endless hospital stay. These are real places. You can visit them. You can even stay in them if you're brave enough, or curious enough, or maybe just tired enough not to care. Let's keep drifting. There's more to come. Part 2. 3. Disturbing true deep woods horror stories. We're moving out of the hotels now, away from the lobbies and hallways and locked rooms, out into the wilderness, the deep woods, the places where civilization ends and something older, stranger takes over. These next stories come from forests, from hiking trails, from campgrounds miles away from help, places where people go to escape, to find peace, to reconnect with nature. And sometimes they find something else entirely. Let's begin. Story 1. The Missing 411. Dennis Martin, Great Smoky Mountains National Park, June 14, 1969. A family reunion. The Martin family and some friends, about 10 people total, camping in Spence Field, a beautiful open meadow surrounded by dense forest. Dennis Martin was 6 years old, red hair, freckles, full of energy. He was playing with his brother and some other boys, running around, being loud the way kids are. The adults were setting up camp, cooking, relaxing. It was a perfect day. The boys decided to play a prank on the adults. They were going to sneak through the woods, circle around and jump out to scare them. Harmless fun. They split up to approach from different directions. Dennis went into the woods alone, and he never came out. When the boys reconvened and Dennis wasn't with them, they figured he was still hiding, waiting for the right moment to jump out. But minutes passed, then 10 minutes, 20. The adults started calling for him. No response. They searched the immediate area. Nothing. They expanded the search. Still nothing. As the sun started to set, panic truly set in. The park rangers were called, then more rangers, then search and rescue teams. By the next morning, hundreds of people were combing the forest. Helicopters, tracking dogs, volunteers, military personnel from a nearby base. It became one of the largest search efforts in the history of the National Park Service. For 10 days they searched. Over 1,000 people at the peak of the operation. The dogs picked up Dennis's scent but lost it at a creek. Searchers found a single footprint that might have been his. That was it. No clothing, no sign of a struggle, no body. A 6-year-old boy had simply vanished into the forest. There were strange details. A family camping nearby reported hearing a wild scream the afternoon Dennis disappeared, a sound that didn't seem quite human. Another witness, a key case detail often cited, reported seeing a man moving quickly through the forest carrying something on his shoulder. This was later dismissed as unreliable, but it's haunted the case ever since. Dennis Martin was never found. His father, William, spent years searching, returning to the park again and again, walking the trails, calling his son's name into the empty woods. He died in 1985, never knowing what happened. Theories abound, of course. A bear attack, though no evidence of that was found. He wandered off and succumbed to exposure, though the searchers should have found remains. He was abducted, though by whom and how remains a mystery. David Polides, a former police officer turned researcher, included Dennis's case in his Missing 411 series, a collection of unexplained disappearances in national parks and forests. Polides notes patterns, people vanishing in areas with dense forest, near water, often found miles away from where they disappeared if they're found at all. Many are children, many vanish in good weather. Search dogs can't track them. The cases are eerie in their consistency. And Dennis Martin's disappearance fits the pattern perfectly. The Great Smoky Mountains are vast, over 500,000 acres, dense, rugged, easy to get lost in. But a 6-year-old boy playing with friends surrounded by adults in broad daylight. How does that happen? The forest doesn't answer. It never does. It just keeps its secrets, silent and deep, while families like the Martins are left with nothing but questions and grief. Lurie. Story 2. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. All right, this one technically takes place in the Ural Mountains in Russia. Not American deep woods, but it's too strange not to include. And the woods are woods, no matter what country they're in. February 1959, 9 experienced hikers set out on a trek through the northern Urals. They were students and graduates from Ural Polytechnic Institute. Skilled, well-prepared, led by a man named Igor Dyatlov. The goal was to reach a mountain called Otorten. It was a difficult route, graded as the highest difficulty level, but they were capable, confident. They never made it back. When the group didn't return as scheduled, a search party was sent out. On February 26, they found the hikers' abandoned tent on the slopes of a mountain called Kholat Syakhl. The tent had been cut open from the inside, as if the hikers had slashed their way out in a panic. Their footprints led away from the tent, down the slope toward a nearby forest. Some of the prints were from bare feet, others from socks, no boots. It was February. In the Urals, temperatures well below freezing. The first 2 bodies were found at the edge of the forest, under a large cedar tree. They were barefoot, dressed only in underwear, dead from hypothermia. Nearby, searchers found the remains of a small fire and broken branches high up in the cedar tree, suggesting someone had climbed it, perhaps trying to see something. 3 more bodies were found between the cedar tree and the tent. One of them was Igor Dyatlov. They appeared to have been trying to return to the tent. All had died from hypothermia. It took months to find the remaining 4. They were discovered in a ravine buried under several meters of snow, and these bodies were different. One had major skull damage, another had severe chest trauma, ribs fractured. The force required for those injuries was compared to that of a car crash. One was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips. Their clothes were torn and scattered, and oddly, some of the clothing showed traces of radiation. The Soviet authorities conducted an investigation. The conclusion: unknown compelling force. They closed the case and sealed the files. The area was declared off-limits for years. Theories have swirled ever since. Avalanche, though the slope wasn't steep enough and there was no evidence of one. Military testing gone wrong, perhaps involving weapons or aircraft that the hikers stumbled upon. Infrasound, naturally occurring low-frequency sound waves that can cause panic and disorientation. Indigenous people, though there's no evidence they were in the area. An animal attack, though again, no evidence. Some of the wilder theories involve aliens, yetis, or some kind of government cover-up. The truth is, we don't know. 9 experienced hikers fled their tent in the middle of the night, in sub-zero temperatures, without proper clothing, and died in ways that don't entirely make sense. Something terrified them enough to cut through their tent and run into the frozen wilderness. And whatever it was, it's still out there in those mountains. Silent. Waiting. Story 3. The Bennington Triangle. Bennington, Vermont. Southwestern Vermont, to be precise. Thick forests, mountains, the long trail running through it. Beautiful, peaceful. The kind of place people go to get away from it all. And between 1945 and 1950, 5 people vanished there without a trace. Let's go through them. November 12th, 1945. Middy Rivers, a 74-year-old hunting guide, experienced, knew the area like the back of his hand. He was leading a group of 4 hunters near Glastonbury Mountain. They were heading back to camp when Middy got a little ahead of the group. He went around a bend in the trail and was never seen again. Searchers combed the area for weeks. They found a single spent rifle cartridge. That was it. No body, no clothing, no sign of struggle. A man who had spent his entire life in those woods simply disappeared. December 1st, 1946. Paula Weldon, an 18-year-old college student from Bennington College. She told her roommate she was going for a hike on the long trail. She was seen by multiple witnesses walking along the trail, wearing a bright red coat. An elderly couple saw her ahead of them on the trail. They looked away for just a moment. When they looked back, she was gone. Massive search efforts, FBI involvement, nothing. Paula Weldon vanished in broad daylight on a well-traveled trail, wearing a bright red coat, and no one ever saw her again. December 1st, 1949. Exactly 3 years after Paula Weldon disappeared, James Tetford, a 68-year-old man, was on a bus heading back to Bennington. He was seen by multiple passengers. The bus made a stop. When it continued, Tetford's belongings were still on the bus. His seat was empty. He was gone. 14 other passengers, a bus driver. No one saw him leave. No one saw anything. He just wasn't there anymore. October 12th, 1950. Paul Jepson, an 8-year-old boy. His mother, who was working at a nearby farm, left him playing in the yard. She checked on him frequently. At one point she looked and he was gone. She assumed he'd wandered into the nearby woods. Search parties, bloodhounds, hundreds of volunteers. The dogs tracked his scent to a crossroads and then lost it completely, as if he'd simply ceased to exist at that spot. Paul Jepson was never found. October 28, 1950. Frida Langer, a 53-year-old woman, experienced hiker. She was out with her cousin near Glastonbury Mountain. She slipped and fell into a stream, got wet, and told her cousin she was going back to the camp to change. The camp was only a short distance away. She never made it. Searchers covered the area for weeks. Nothing. Then, the following spring, in May 1951, her body was found in an open area that had been searched multiple times before. No explanation for how it got there. No cause of death could be determined due to decomposition. 5 people, 5 years, all in the same general area, all vanished without logical explanation. The area became known as the Bennington Triangle, a sort of parallel to the Bermuda Triangle, a place where people just disappear. Theories range from a serial killer to wild animals, to disorientation and exposure. Some blame the forest itself, as if the land is somehow taking people. Indigenous legends speak of the area as cursed, a place where the forest swallows the unwary. The disappearances stopped after 1950, or at least the documented ones did. But the area remains eerie, unsettling. Hikers report feeling watched, hearing footsteps behind them that stop when they stop, finding trails that loop back on themselves in impossible ways. The forest doesn't explain, it just stands there, silent and deep, keeping whatever secrets it holds. And that's where we'll pause for now. 3 stories from the deep woods, places where the trees close in, where trails twist and turn, where people go missing and are never found. Dennis Martin, 6 years old, playing with his brother. 9 hikers in the Ural Mountains, fleeing something in the night. 5 people in Vermont, swallowed by a forest that gave nothing back. The wilderness is vast, indifferent, beautiful and terrible all at once. Part 3. 3 most disturbing true Alaskan small-town horror stories. We're heading north now, way north, to Alaska, the last frontier, a place where towns are small, isolated, sometimes accessible only by plane or boat, where winter darkness lasts for months and the wilderness presses in from all sides. Alaska is beautiful, of course, magnificent, but it's also harsh, unforgiving. And in the small towns scattered across that vast landscape, some very dark things have happened. Let's drift into these stories. Story 1. The Seward Axe Murders. Seward, Alaska, June 1932. A small fishing town on the Kenai Peninsula, population maybe 1,000 people. Everyone knew everyone. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked. Until the night of June 21st, a family named the Hurleys lived on the outskirts of town. Robert Hurley, his wife Helen, and their young daughter. Robert worked odd jobs around town. They were quiet people, kept to themselves mostly. On the evening of June 21st, neighbors heard screams coming from the Hurley house. By the time anyone got there, it was too late. All 3 members of the family had been murdered with an axe. Brutal, frenzied attacks. The killer had moved through the house methodically, room by room. The town was horrified, terrified. An axe murderer, loose in their small community. The authorities had no leads, no suspects, no clear motive. And then it happened again. 2 weeks later, on July 5th, another family was attacked. The Strombergs. Same method, an axe, same brutality. The father survived, barely, but his wife and 2 children were killed. Panic set in. People started locking their doors, sleeping with weapons nearby. Some families left town entirely, fleeing to Anchorage or farther south. The Seward police were overwhelmed. The Alaska Territorial Police got involved. Still, no arrests. Then the attacks stopped. Just stopped. No more murders. No one was ever caught. No one was ever charged. Theories emerged naturally. A drifter passing through. A local resident with a grudge. Someone who'd snapped under the isolation and darkness of Alaskan life. But without evidence, the theories remained just that. The Seward axe murders faded into local legend. Older residents still talk about it, usually in hushed tones. The houses where the murders took place have been torn down or renovated beyond recognition. But the fear lingered for years. The sense that someone in their small, close-knit community had done this, and had gotten away with it. In Alaska, there's a saying, the bush swallows people. Sometimes literally through accidents and exposure, but sometimes in other ways. Sometimes people vanish into the wilderness or into the long winter darkness, and they're never found, never caught, never held accountable. The Seward axe murderer became one of those, swallowed by Alaska, gone but never forgotten. Story 2. The Nome Disappearances. Nome, Alaska, western coast right on the Bering Sea. Population around 3 to 800. It's isolated, harsh, with winters that are long and brutal. The nearest city of any size is Anchorage, about 540 miles away. Nome has a dark history, Gold Rush town in the early 1900s, built on desperation and greed. The native Inupiat population was pushed aside, their land taken, their lives disrupted. Violence, disease, and exploitation followed. And then, starting in the 1960s, people started disappearing. Not just one or two, dozens. Mostly Alaska Native women. They would leave their homes heading to a friend's house or the store or a bar, and they'd never arrive. No bodies found, no evidence of foul play, just gone. The FBI got involved eventually in 2004, launching an investigation into what they called unusual disappearances. They looked into 24 cases specifically, spanning from 1960 to 2004. 9 of them were confirmed homicides. The rest remained unsolved. The problem was and is that Nome is small, remote. If someone wants to hide a body, there's endless wilderness to do it in. Frozen tundra, dense brush, the Bering Sea. Evidence disappears quickly in that environment. But the pattern was clear. Young women, often Native women, often last seen in the downtown area, often intoxicated or vulnerable, and often the police response was slow or inadequate. Some families felt their missing loved ones weren't taken seriously. That because they were Native, because they were poor, because they were from Nome, they didn't matter. One case in particular stands out. Jenna Breinig. She went missing in 1998 at age 13, just vanished. Her body was never found. Her case remains open. In 2016, the FBI released information suggesting that at least some of the disappearances were the work of a serial killer. Someone who had been operating in Nome for decades, targeting vulnerable women, getting away with it over and over. But no one has been caught. No arrests. No closure for the families. There's a famous phrase used to describe missing and murdered Indigenous women. No one is looking for us. And in Nome, for too many years, that was true. The disappearances were ignored, minimized, forgotten. The community has pushed back now. Vigils, awareness campaigns, pressure on law enforcement to take these cases seriously. But the damage is done. Decades of women lost, families shattered. Nome sits on the edge of the continent, staring out at the frozen sea. It's a hard place, a place where survival is a daily struggle. And for some, survival was impossible, not because of the cold or the isolation, but because someone was hunting them. And that someone is still out there. Story 3. The Talkeetna Cabin, Talkeetna, Alaska. Small town, population around 900. It's known mostly as a base for climbers heading to Denali. Rugged, beautiful, surrounded by wilderness. In the winter of 1987, a group of hunters rented a cabin about 15 miles outside of town. Remote location, accessible only by snowmobile or ski plane. They planned to spend a week there, hunting moose, enjoying the solitude. On the second night, they started hearing things. Footsteps outside the cabin, heavy, deliberate, circling the building. They assumed it was an animal, a moose, maybe, or a bear woken from hibernation. But when they shone a flashlight out the window, they saw nothing, no tracks in the snow, nothing. The footsteps continued, around and around the cabin. One of the hunters grabbed a rifle and went outside. He walked the perimeter. No tracks, no sign of anything. But the moment he went back inside, the footsteps started again. This continued for hours. The men tried to ignore it, tried to sleep. But the sound was relentless. Footsteps, circling, no pattern, no explanation. And then the scratching started. Something was dragging claws or fingernails down the side of the cabin. Long, slow scrapes, over and over. The men sat inside, armed, listening. Whatever was out there was toying with them, playing. At one point, something hit the cabin door, hard, like a shoulder ramming into it. The door shook but held. The men shouted, fired a warning shot through the roof. The noise stopped. For about 10 minutes. Then it started again. Footsteps, scratching, now joined by a low guttural sound. Not quite human, not quite animal. A kind of growl mixed with something else, something that made their skin crawl. They lasted until dawn. The moment there was enough light, they packed up and left. Snowmobiled back to Talkeetna and never returned to the cabin. When they told people in town what happened, the reactions were mixed. Some laughed it off. Others got quiet. A few said, "Oh, you rented that cabin." Turns out the cabin had a reputation. Other hunters had reported similar experiences: footsteps, scratching, strange sounds. Some said the cabin was built on an old burial site. Others claimed it was haunted by a trapper who died there in the 1950s, frozen to death when his stove failed. The local Denaina people have stories about creatures in the woods, beings that mimic human sounds, that walk on two legs but aren't human. Kushtaka, they're called in some versions. Shapeshifters, tricksters, things that lure people into the wilderness and make them disappear. The hunters didn't care about the stories or the explanations. They knew what they'd experienced. Something had circled that cabin all night. Something had wanted in. The cabin still stands, as far as anyone knows. Remote, empty, waiting. And sometimes, on winter nights, people flying over that area report seeing a light in the cabin's window, a flickering like a fire or a lantern. But no one's supposed to be there. No one's rented it in years. Maybe it's just a reflection. Ice crystals, trick of the light. Or maybe something's still there, still waiting, still circling. Alaska is a place where the wilderness wins, where nature is indifferent to human life, where isolation can break people, drive them mad, make them dangerous. The Seward axe murderer, never caught, swallowed by the vastness. The missing women of Nome, taken by someone who knew the land could keep secrets. The thing outside the Talkeetna cabin, circling in the dark, scratching at the walls. These stories remind us that there are still wild places, places where we're not in control, where something else is watching, waiting. Let's keep drifting, there's more to come. Part 4. 3 true disturbing horror stories from small-town USA. We're moving back to the lower 48 now, to small towns, the kind of places where everyone knows everyone, where nothing bad is supposed to happen. Quiet streets, church on Sundays, high school football games on Friday nights. But of course bad things do happen, sometimes the worst things, and in small towns, there's nowhere to hide from them. Let's begin. Story 1. The Villisca Axe Murders. Villisca, Iowa. June 10, 1912. A town of about 2,000 people, farming community, wholesome, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and trusted their neighbors. The Moore family lived on East 2nd Street, Josiah and Sarah Moore, and their 4 children. Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, good people, regular churchgoers. Josiah was a successful businessman. The family was well liked. On the evening of June 9th, they attended a Children's Day service at their church. Their children performed in the program. Afterward, they invited 2 young girls from the congregation, Lena and Ina Stillinger, to spend the night at their house. The girls' parents agreed. The group arrived home around 10 p.m., went inside, locked the doors, went to bed, and sometime between midnight and 5 a.m., someone entered the house and murdered all 8 of them with an axe. The killer moved through the house methodically, started with the parents, Josiah and Sarah, in their bedroom, then the 4 children in their rooms, then Lena and Ina in the downstairs bedroom. Each victim was struck in the head while they slept. The blows were brutal, crushing. The killer covered the victims' faces with bedclothes afterward, as if unable to look at what he'd done. There were odd details. All the mirrors in the house were covered with cloth. A bowl of bloody water was left in the kitchen, suggesting the killer had washed his hands. The axe, which belonged to Josiah, was left in the downstairs bedroom. The killer had apparently spent time in the house after the murders, eating food from the kitchen, possibly even smoking a cigarette. The bodies were discovered the next morning when a neighbor noticed the family hadn't done their morning chores. She entered the house and found the horror inside. The town was devastated, terrified. 8 people, including 6 children, slaughtered in their own home. The investigation was immediate but chaotic. The crime scene was poorly managed. Hundreds of townspeople walked through the house before it was properly searched. Evidence was contaminated or lost. Suspects emerged. A traveling preacher named George Kelly, who had been in town that night. He later confessed, then recanted. He was tried twice. Both ended in acquittal due to lack of evidence. A man named Frank Jones, a local businessman and political rival of Josiah Moore, was suspected. Some believed he'd hired someone to kill the family. But again, no evidence. The murders were never solved. The Moore house stood empty for years. No one wanted to live there. Eventually it was purchased and turned into a museum, a sort of dark tourist attraction. People can even stay overnight now if they want, and many report strange things. Footsteps upstairs when no one's there, the sound of children crying, objects moving, doors opening and closing on their own. One overnight guest reported waking to the sensation of someone standing over her bed, watching. She opened her eyes and saw a shadow figure, tall and motionless. She screamed, turned on the light, and it was gone. The Villisca axe murders remain one of the most infamous unsolved crimes in American history. 8 people, one night. A killer who walked away and was never caught. The house still stands. You can visit. You can walk through the rooms where it happened. And if you're quiet, if you listen carefully, some say you can still hear them, the children, crying in the dark. Story 2. The Texarkana Moonlight Murders. Texarkana, a town split right down the middle. Half in Texas, half in Arkansas. 1946, just after World War II. Soldiers coming home. Life trying to return to normal. And then the attacks started. February 22nd, 1946. A couple parked on a lover's lane outside town. They were attacked by a man wearing a white cloth sack over his head with eye holes cut out. He beat them both badly. They survived. March 24th, 1946. Another couple parked in a different secluded area. The man was shot and killed. The woman was sexually assaulted and shot, but survived. April 14th, 1946. Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker, both teenagers, out on a date. Their bodies were found the next morning on a rural road. Both had been shot multiple times. Betty Jo had been shot in the face. May 3rd, 1946. Virgil and Katie Starks, a married couple, at home. The killer shot Virgil through a window while he sat reading the newspaper. Katie ran but was chased and shot twice. She survived long enough to describe the attack. Virgil died. 5 attacks, 8 victims, 5 dead. The killer wore a hood, attacked at night, often during a full moon, hence the name, the Phantom Killer or the Moonlight Murderer. Texarkana went into full panic mode. People stopped going out at night. Hardware stores sold out of locks, guns, ammunition. Lovers' lanes emptied. Curfews were enforced. The Texas Rangers got involved. Hundreds of suspects were questioned, but no one was caught. The attack stopped after May 3rd. Just stopped. The phantom vanished. Over the years, various suspects emerged. A man named U.L. Swinney was arrested and questioned extensively. His wife claimed he'd confessed to her, but she later recanted. There wasn't enough evidence to charge him. He was convicted of car theft instead and sent to prison. Some believe Swinney was the killer. Others think it was someone else entirely. The case remains officially unsolved. The attacks inspired a 1976 horror film, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, which dramatized the murders and added fictional elements. The film terrified a new generation and became a cult classic. A remake was released in 2014. But for the people who lived through it, it wasn't entertainment. It was real. The fear was real. Parents keeping their children inside after dark. Couples too terrified to be alone together. A hooded figure out there in the darkness, hunting. Texarkana has moved on mostly. The town is quiet now, normal. But older residents still remember, still lock their doors, still glance over their shoulders on moonlit nights. The phantom killer was never caught, never punished, never stopped. He just disappeared. And somewhere maybe he's still out there, old now, forgotten, carrying the secret of what he did to his grave. Story 3. The Keddie Cabin Murders. Keddie, California, a tiny resort town in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Population maybe a few hundred. The kind of place people went to get away, to start over, to find peace. The Sharp family moved to Keddie in 1980. Glenna Sharp, a single mother, and her 5 children. They rented Cabin 28 in the Keddie Resort, a cluster of small cabins in the woods. Money was tight, but they were managing. The kids went to school. Glenna worked. They were trying to build a life. On the night of April 11th, 1981, Glenna's oldest daughter, Sheila, was spending the night at a friend's house. The rest of the family was at Cabin 28. Glenna, her son John, 15, her daughter Tina, 12, and 2 younger boys, Rick, 10, and Greg, 5. John had a friend over, Dana Wingate, 17, who was staying the night. Sometime during the night, someone entered the cabin. Sheila came home the next morning around 7:30 a.m. She opened the door to cabin 28 and found a scene of unimaginable horror. Her mother, Glenna, her brother John and his friend Dana were dead, bound with electrical cord and medical tape, bludgeoned and stabbed. The violence was extreme, personal, frenzied. Blood covered the walls, the furniture, the floor. Tina was missing. The two younger boys, Rick and Greg, were found asleep in a bedroom, physically unharmed. They'd slept through the entire attack, or claimed they had. The police arrived. The investigation began. But it was botched from the start. The crime scene was contaminated. Evidence was mishandled. Leads weren't followed up. The small-town sheriff's department was overwhelmed. 3 years later, in 1984, a skull was found about 50 miles from Keddie. It was identified as Tina Sharp. The rest of her remains were never recovered. Suspects emerged over the years. A man named Martin Smart, who lived in a nearby cabin. He and his wife had gotten into loud arguments the night of the murders. His wife later said he'd come home with blood on him. A friend of Smart's, John Beau Boubed, was also suspected. But no arrests were made. Evidence disappeared from the sheriff's evidence locker. Witnesses recanted. The case went cold. In 2016, a retired investigator discovered a hammer in a pond near the cabin. It had been there for decades. It might have been the murder weapon. But by then, Smart was dead. Boubed was dead. Too late for justice. Cabin 28 was torn down years ago, but the other cabins in the resort still stand. Some are occupied. Others sit empty, slowly rotting. People who live there report strange things. Screams in the night, shadows moving between the cabins, a feeling of being watched. One resident reported waking up to find all the furniture in her cabin rearranged. Another said she heard children crying, but when she went outside, there was no one there. Glenna, John, Dana, and Tina never got justice. Their killer or killers were never held accountable. The case remains open but unsolved. Keddie is quiet now. The resort is mostly abandoned, but the memory lingers. A family torn apart, children murdered in their own home, and someone, somewhere, who got away with it. Small towns, places that are supposed to be safe, but sometimes the darkness creeps in. Sometimes it comes through a door left unlocked, or hides behind a white hood, or waits in a cabin in the woods. Villisca, Texarkana, Keddie, 3 towns, 3 tragedies, 3 cases that remain unsolved, haunting the communities where they happened. Let's keep drifting. We're not done yet. Part 5. 3. Real horror stories that defy explanation. We're moving into stranger territory now. Stories that don't have clear answers. Events that seem to violate the laws of nature, logic, reason. Things that happened, that were witnessed, documented, investigated, and still don't make sense. These are the stories that keep you awake. Not because they're violent or tragic, though some are, but because they're impossible, and yet they happened. Let's begin. Story 1. The Devil's Footprints. Devon, England, February 8, 1855. People woke up to find footprints in the snow. That's not unusual. Animals leave prints, people leave prints, but these prints were different. They were hoof-like, cloven, about 4 inches long and 3 inches wide, and they stretched for over 100 miles. The prints appeared overnight. They crossed the countryside, moving in a nearly straight line. They went over rooftops, through walls, across the Exe estuary, 2 miles of water, and continued on the other side. They climbed trees, squeezed through 6-inch drainage pipes, appeared on top of high walls that would be impossible for an animal to scale. And they were everywhere. Dozens of towns, hundreds of witnesses, all describing the same thing, strange hoofprints that defied explanation. The pattern was consistent. A single line of prints as if made by a creature walking on 2 legs. The stride length was about 8 inches. Whatever made them had moved methodically, purposefully, covering vast distances in a single night. Panic spread. This was Victorian England, religious, superstitious. People immediately thought of the devil. Some claimed Satan himself had walked through Devon that night, marking the land. Churches held special services. People locked their doors and windows. Investigators tried to explain it. Maybe a badger, maybe multiple badgers, all walking in the same pattern. Maybe a kangaroo that escaped from a private zoo. Maybe a weather balloon dragging a grappling hook. Maybe mass hysteria and people seeing normal animal tracks and imagining something sinister. None of these explanations fit. Badgers don't climb walls or walk in straight lines for 100 miles. No kangaroo was reported missing. A balloon wouldn't leave consistent prints or cross water. The incident was documented in newspapers, investigated by authorities, discussed in Parliament, and no one could explain it. The prints simply appeared, caused mass panic, and then the mystery faded as the snow melted. But every so often, similar prints are reported. In Scotland in 2009, in Devon again in 2014. Always hoof-like, always inexplicable. Whatever walked through Devon in 1855 left no other trace, no sightings, no attacks, just footprints. Hundreds of miles of impossible footprints. And no one has ever figured out what made them. Story 2. The Taos Hum Taos, New Mexico. A small artistic town in the high desert. Quiet, peaceful, known for its galleries, its adobe architecture, its spiritual communities, and for a sound that no one can explain. Since the early 1990s, residents of Taos have reported hearing a persistent low-frequency humming noise. Not everyone hears it, only about 2% of the population, but those who do describe it as maddening. A low, droning hum, like a distant diesel engine idling. It never stops, it's worse at night, it's worse indoors. People who hear the hum report headaches, insomnia, anxiety, nosebleeds. Some have moved away to escape it. Others have become obsessed with finding the source. Investigations have been conducted. The University of New Mexico looked into it. The federal government got involved. Acoustic engineers measured sound frequencies. Geologists checked for seismic activity. Electrical engineers searched for power line interference. Nothing. The hum doesn't show up on recording equipment. It can't be measured. It only exists in the ears and minds of those who hear it. Theories abound. Military testing at nearby Los Alamos, underground construction or mining, natural geological processes, tinnitus, mass psychogenic illness. But the people who hear it insist it's real, external, not in their heads. They describe it identically. Low, persistent, mechanical, and it's driving them slowly insane. The Taos hum isn't unique. Similar phenomena have been reported in Windsor, Ontario, in Bristol, England, in Bondi, Australia. Isolated pockets of people scattered across the world, all hearing the same inexplicable sound. Some researchers believe it's related to electromagnetic radiation. Others think it's a side effect of certain people's ears being sensitive to low-frequency vibrations that most people can't detect. Still, others believe it's something we haven't discovered yet, a new form of energy, a byproduct of modern technology, something in the earth itself. The people who hear it don't care about theories. They just want it to stop. Taos is still there, still quiet, still beautiful, except for the hum, low and relentless, heard by the unlucky few, and no one knows what it is. Story 3. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse. The Flannan Isles, a group of small rocky islands off the west coast of Scotland, remote, barren, uninhabited, except for the lighthouse. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse was built in 1899, perched on Eilean Moor, the largest of the islands. It was an important beacon, guiding ships through the treacherous waters of the Outer Hebrides. 3 lighthouse keepers were stationed there at all times, rotating in shifts. On December 15, 1900, a passing ship noted that the lighthouse wasn't lit. Strange, but not immediately alarming. Weather in that region could be brutal. Maybe the light had malfunctioned, but when the relief vessel arrived on December 26th to swap out the crew, they found something deeply unsettling. The lighthouse was empty. All 3 keepers, Thomas Marshall, James Duckett, and Donald MacArthur, were gone. Vanished. The investigating crew searched the lighthouse. Everything inside was normal. The beds were made, the kitchen was clean, The clock had stopped. The fire was out. 2 of the 3 sets of oilskins, heavy weather gear, were missing. The 3rd set was still hanging by the door. The logbook provided some clues, though they raised more questions than answers. The last entry was December 15th. It described a severe storm, with winds unlike anything the keepers had seen before. But here's the thing. There was no storm in that area on December 15th. Other ships, weather stations, none reported unusual weather. The final entry, written by Marshall, described Ducat, the most experienced keeper, as very quiet, and MacArthur as having been crying. This was bizarre. These were seasoned men, not prone to panic, and then they were gone. Theories emerged quickly. They'd been swept away by a freak wave while working outside. But why would they all go outside together, leaving the lighthouse unmanned? And why would MacArthur go without his oilskins? Maybe they'd been kidnapped. But by whom? The islands were uninhabited. No ships had been in the area. Maybe they'd fought, and one killed the others and then himself. But there was no evidence of violence. No bodies. Nothing. The more supernatural theories suggested they'd been taken by something. Sea spirits. Ghosts. The islands had a reputation in local folklore as haunted, cursed. Fishermen avoided them. Over a century later, we still don't know what happened. The lighthouse was automated in 1971. No more keepers, just machines. But people who visit Islean Moor report strange feelings, a sense of unease, of being watched. Some claim to hear voices on the wind, calling out in distress. 3 men, experienced, competent, vanished from a locked lighthouse on a tiny, barren island in the middle of the ocean. And no one has ever figured out where they went. These are the stories that don't fit. The devil's footprints that walked across England and defied physics. The Tao's hum that exists only for some, torment without source. The 3 lighthouse keepers who vanished from a locked room on an isolated island. No neat explanations, no satisfying conclusions. Just mysteries that persist, unsettling and strange. To Part 6. 3 final disturbing true horror stories. We're in the home stretch now. Just a few more stories before we let you drift off completely. These last ones are a mix, some violent, some strange, all deeply unsettling in their own ways. So let's settle in one last time and wander through these final tales. Story 1. The Salish Sea Feet. The Salish Sea, the body of water between Washington State and British Columbia. Beautiful coastline, rocky beaches, quiet coves, and for some reason, feet keep washing up on shore. It started in August 2007. A 12-year-old girl found a human foot inside a running shoe on Jedediah Island in British Columbia. Just a foot, still inside a sock and shoe, decomposed but intact enough to identify as human. Weird, but these things happen. Bodies end up in water, they decompose, parts separate and wash ashore, except it kept happening. 6 days later, another foot. Different island, also in a running shoe. Then another in February 2008, and another in May, and another in June. By 2019, over 20 human feet had been discovered along the shores of the Salish Sea. Almost all of them were inside running shoes. Almost all were right feet, though some left feet were found too. They were in various states of decomposition. Some were matched to missing persons. Others remain unidentified. Theories emerged quickly. Serial killer dismembering victims and dumping them in the water. Plane crash survivors, tsunami victims from the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, somehow drifting all the way to North America. But forensic analysis suggested something more mundane, if still unsettling. Modern running shoes are buoyant. They're designed with air pockets and foam. When a body decomposes in water, the feet separate naturally at the ankle joint. It's a weak point. The shoes act like flotation devices, carrying the feet to shore while the rest of the body sinks or drifts away. So not a serial killer, just bodies in the water. Suicides, accidents, drownings. The shoes preserving the feet and bringing them to shore, which is somehow more disturbing. The idea that there are enough bodies in the Salish Sea for this to happen regularly. 20 feet. 20 people at least. Some identified as people who'd jumped from bridges or fallen from boats. Others never identified at all. The beaches along the Salish Sea are beautiful. People walk them every day. And every so often someone finds a shoe, and inside it, a foot. A remnant of a person who ended up in the water and never came back. It's become almost routine now. A grim reminder that the ocean keeps its dead. Sometimes it gives a little piece back, just enough to remind us they're still out there. Story 2. The Hinterkaifeck Murders. All right, we're going back to Germany for this one, because it's too strange not to include. And because horror doesn't respect borders. Hinterkaifeck, a small farmstead in Bavaria, Germany, about 40 miles north of Munich, isolated. The family living there, Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria, and Victoria's 2 children, Cecilia, age 7, and Joseph, age 2, kept to themselves mostly. In late March 1922, Andreas started noticing strange things, footprints in the snow leading from the forest to the farm, but none leading back, as if someone had walked to the farm and just stayed. He heard footsteps in the attic, noises at night. Keys went missing. The family's previous maid had quit abruptly, claiming the house was haunted. Andreas hired a new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who arrived on March 31st, 1922. That was the last day anyone saw the family alive. On April 4th, neighbors noticed the family hadn't been seen in days. The mail was piling up. The children weren't at school. They entered the farm and found a scene of absolute horror. Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and young Cecilia were dead in the barn, killed with a mattock, a farming tool like a pickaxe. They'd been lured there one by one and killed. Little Joseph and the new maid Maria were found dead in the house, killed the same way. All 6 victims had been struck repeatedly in the head. The violence was extreme, and whoever did it had stayed in the house for days afterward. There was evidence of this. The farm animals had been fed. Food had been eaten from the kitchen. Neighbors reported seeing smoke from the chimney after the family had been killed. The killer had apparently lived in the house with the bodies for several days before leaving. The investigation was extensive. Over 100 people were questioned, but no one was ever arrested. The case remains unsolved. The farmstead was torn down in 1923. The land was sold. But the mystery lingered. Who killed the family? Why did they stay afterward, eating their food, sleeping in their beds, feeding their animals? Why kill the new maid who'd only just arrived and couldn't have known anything? Some believed it was a drifter, a vagrant who'd been living in the forest and decided to take over the farm. Others thought it was someone the family knew, a neighbor, a relative, someone with a grudge. The footprints in the snow suggest the killer had been watching the farm for days, planning, waiting, and then when the moment was right, they struck, methodically, efficiently, and then stayed, as if the farm belonged to them now. It's one of the most disturbing unsolved murders in German history, not just because of the brutality, but because of the wrongness of it. The killer living among the bodies, using the family's things, as if they'd simply replaced them. Hinterkaifeck is gone now, but the story persists. A family slaughtered on an isolated farm, a killer who vanished into history, never caught, never punished. And somewhere, maybe they lived out the rest of their life, carrying the secret of what they did, what they saw, what they became in that farmhouse in Bavaria. Story 3. The Dyatlov Pass Incident, Revisited. We touched on this earlier, but let's drift back to it one more time, because new information came out in 2020 that's worth mentioning. The Ural Mountains, February 1959. 9 hikers dead, tent cut open from the inside, bodies found in stages, some with catastrophic injuries. The Soviet investigation concluded unknown compelling force and closed the case. For 60 years, the theories multiplied. Military testing, infrasound, indigenous attack, avalanche, Yeti, UFOs. Everything was on the table. And then in 2020, a team of scientists ran computer simulations and proposed a new theory, a delayed slab avalanche. Not a typical avalanche, but a small localized one caused by the hikers cutting into the slope to pitch their tent. The snow above them was unstable. Hours later, while they slept, A slab of compacted snow broke loose and slammed into the tent. The impact would have been sudden, violent, like being hit by a car. It would explain the chest and skull injuries, blunt force trauma consistent with heavy snow impact. It would explain why they cut their way out of the tent in a panic, not taking time to grab boots or proper clothing. Once outside in sub-zero temperatures, they tried to regroup, built a fire, climbed the cedar tree to see if they could spot the tent or assess the damage. But it was too cold, too dark. They were underdressed and injured. Hypothermia set in. The group split up. Some tried to return to the tent. Others sought shelter in the ravine. All of them died. The missing tongue and eyes, scavenging animals, decomposition, bodies left in the wilderness for weeks before being found. The radiation on the clothing, naturally occurring from the thorium mantles used in camping lanterns at the time. It's a plausible explanation. Not as dramatic as the alternatives, but it fits the evidence: a tragic accident, a series of bad decisions under duress, nature being harsh and unforgiving. But of course not everyone accepts this theory. The injuries were too severe for an avalanche, some argue. The behavior of the hikers was too erratic. Something else happened, something we still don't understand. And maybe that's the truth. Maybe we'll never know exactly what happened on that mountain. Maybe the 9 hikers took the full story with them into the snow. The Dyatlov Pass is still there, remote, frozen. Hikers still trek through it, though many avoid the specific area where the tent was found, out of respect, or superstition, or fear. 9 people went into the mountains and never came back. And whether it was an avalanche or infrasound or something stranger, the result is the same: they're gone. And the mountain keeps its secrets, closing, drifting into sleep. And that's where we'll leave it tonight. We've wandered through hotels where guests never checked out, through deep forests where people vanished without a trace, through small towns that hid dark secrets, through mysteries that defy explanation, through tragedies that remain unsolved. The Cecil Hotel, the Skirvin, the Hotel del Coronado, the Crescent, Dennis Martin in the Smoky Mountains, the Dyatlov Pass hikers, the Bennington Triangle, Seward's axe murderer, Gnome's missing women, the cabin in Talkeetna, Villisca, Texarkana, Keddy, the Devil's Footprints, the Tau's Hum, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse, the Salish Sea Feet, Hinterkaifeck. And back to Dyatlov Pass one more time. These stories are real, documented, investigated, and in most cases still unexplained. They remind us that the world is stranger than we like to think, that there are still mysteries, still questions without answers, still places where the past refuses to let go. But for now, let's leave them behind. Let's drift away from the dark hotels and the silent forests, from the small towns with their buried secrets, from the impossible footprints and the humming in the desert and the feet washing up on distant shores. Close your eyes, let your breathing slow. Let the stories fade into background noise, soft and distant. You're safe here, in your bed, in your room. The doors are locked, the lights are off, and whatever happened in those places, in those moments, it's not happening now, not here. Just stories, just history, just voices from the past whispering in the dark. Let them whisper, let them fade and drift. Just drift. Sleep well.